There we go. We have our quorum and we are live now.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning. Could you do the roll call, please, Janice?
Yes, ma'am. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos.
Here.
Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Miss Walker.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Coleman.
Here.
Hanover County, Mr. Badunez. I believe he's here. We'll go back to him. Mr. Flagg.
Here.
Henrico County, Vice Chair Smidler. Mr. Yor. Newkent County, Chair LeDuc.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Ms. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Bridewell. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky. Mr. Sparks. GRTC, Ms. Robinson. Ms. Del Ross. Plan RVA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Mr. Ariel.
Here.
Ride Finders, Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
RMTA, Ms. Simmons. VDOT, Ms. McAdory.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Ms. Mueller.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. That concludes the attendance roll call, and we do have a quorum.
Ms. Firestone.
All right,
this is
thank you
Sharon
very much.
Smitler.
I'm
Sharon
going to go.
Smitler here. I apologize. I had my speakers lowered.
Okay, thank you. Did I miss anyone else? I think we have everybody, but Mr. Badunez didn't call, but I see that he is present. I'm going to mark him as present.
Janice, just a note for future meetings, Ms. Del Ross isn't employed at GRTC anymore.
Okay, I'll mark that off. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. All right, Chet, do you want to say something about the virtual meetings that are continuing?
Well, I think you just said it, but yes, we have a system in place now. I just shared the screen, but we are live streaming all of our meetings on YouTube. We do use Zoom webinar now, which everyone was able to log into this morning. Thank you very much. Where you get a registration link and an individual calendar invitation once you register. It's the same kind of process you would use for continuing ed or other types of webinars that people offer now. And there is a tool at the bottom of the screen in the webinar platform with Q&A. So anyone that is not a committee member and is participating as an attendee can ask questions through the Q&A when we get to the open public comment period, or even if the chair seeks comment on other agenda items, the Q&A is the tool to use for that give and take. So anyone who is an attendee today or plans to be one in the future for other meetings, that's the avenue to use to interact with the committee during the meeting. And that will be the update on the virtual meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chet. Very cool. Yeah, I'm exploring the screen. The Q&A thing is kind of neat.
We now
Okay.
have Ms. Dubinsky as well. Sorry, we now have Ms. Dubinsky as well. She's moved over as a panelist.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any amendments to the agenda today? All right, hearing none, we'll move along to approval of the October 12th minutes. And I'd like to thank Sharon for covering for me. So I will abstain from the minutes, but I think we can do a voice vote for approval of the minutes once we get a motion.
Sharon Smitler, so moved.
Thank you, Sharon. Do you have
John
a
O'Keefe,
second?
I'll second.
All right, thanks, John. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? All right, thank you very much. Minutes are approved. Did we get any open comment? And I don't see anything in the Q&A.
We did not receive any comments in advance.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, moving on. I don't have a report as chairman, except for thanking Sharon again for covering for me for October. And we'll go on to item 5, TPO update.
Great. So on the screen is an overview of our current work efforts. As you all know, we adopted the Long Range Transportation Plan, Connect RVA 2045 on October 4th. And we are now working, we do have the final version of the plan document is fully updated on the website. We also are transitioning the plan website, the connectrva2045.org, to a permanent home for the long range plan. And there will be some shifting of the content on that site. But we are also planning to develop a citizens guide over the next few months that really pares down the content to things that people may immediately be looking for related to the plan. We are starting to talk about scoping for the next one. So get ready for that. And we're looking at scenario planning and some of the other things that we're hoping to get included in this version and just weren't able to fit everything in. So that's going to be an upcoming thing, probably first part of 2022. We'll start thinking about advisory committee and scoping the first components of what we need to do, like socioeconomic data and other kinds of things. The Ashland Trolley Line Trail study is continuing to move forward with the National Park Service partnership. And there is also an effort underway to finish up and finalize the update to the Regional Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. We are now looking at similar efforts that we used for Connect RVA 2045 to engage the public on a final draft, including extensive public review and other ways for people to weigh in on the content and the features of the plan update. And we're looking at probably mid to late spring for a draft of that plan to be across your desks for review and recommendation to the full policy board. The Active Transportation Work Group and the Vision Zero Work Group continue to meet as needed. I think the Vision Zero Work Group is it's close to kind of making some big decisions on the regional action plan, and we're working with VDOT's consultant to get to that next milestone. And that's it for the current work efforts. I'd be happy to take any questions. Otherwise, Madam Chair, I can turn it over to Ken Lance to give a preview of what the Community Transportation Advisory Committee meeting will hold for November.
Okay, that sounds good. Good morning, Mr. Lance.
Morning. I'll be very brief. The Community Transportation Advisory Committee is meeting on Thursday, November the 18th at 12 noon. It will be a hybrid in-person and virtual meeting. And we have 3 presentations on the agenda. First is a presentation by Tiffany Dubinsky of DRPT on the Virginia Transit Equity and Modernization Study. Then we're going to hear from Chet Parsons. He's going to give us an update on the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. And then finally, we're going to have a overview of VTrans, the statewide transportation planning effort by Chris Richmond of the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. Any questions for Chet or Ken? Okay, hearing none,
Thank
we'll
you.
go to item 6. Thank you, guys. Brooke Jackson, I think, is going to give an overview of Smart Scale. Dun, dun, dun. round 5.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna try sharing my screen as well. Screen. And let's see. All right, and I'm in the middle of the presentation. Sorry about that. All right, so we can see my screen and we can hear me. Great.
Yes.
This is Brooke Jackson, and I'm on the Smart Scale team. I'm actually stepping in as the interim program manager for Smart Scale right now, as Chad Tucker is leading the project pipeline and working on that right now. And my email address, if you need to get a hold of me, is brooke.jackson@oypi.virginia.gov, and I will have that on the end of the slide for comments and questions after this as well. So what I'm going to go over is round 4 recap of Smart Scale, and we're going to obviously gear this to the Richmond district with round 4 feedback covered from Smart Scale that we've gotten from the applicant community, also our internal staff and external staff we've gotten over the past round. And then we'll dig in a little bit to the round 5 changes being considered for Smart Scale. And we're hoping to get that adopted here in December for the next year, pre-app opening in March. And per request from the TPO, going over some possible leveraging data and trends and some thoughts and ideas for round 5. And we're going to touch on a new module within the Smart Portal, the pre-scoping module that's currently open, and then what's coming up in the next steps for Smart Scale in the next few months. All right, so this slide right here is an overview of the past 4 rounds of Smart Scale, showing you where we've come from, how many applications we've scored, 321 in round 1 to now we're kind of going back down. We were increasing every single year, and it was a little scary taking on 50 more applications or 100 more applications every round, and we're getting back to more of a normalized application process and scoring process. The first round was really unique as we had 7.2 billion in requests, and we had 1.4 billion available, and that was because we had 5 years of funding available that round, and that's kind of our glory round. It was hitting 1.4 billion, and every round after that we had less money until this round, round 4, where we had 1.4 billion, and we've gotten back up to kind of our round 1 funding availability. And this is because the omnibus bill was introduced in 2020, and we were able to apply those revenues to the round 4 process. But as you can see, we're always going to have more requests than available funding, a lot more requests than available funding. We're always going to have winners and losers in this process, and we're just trying to prioritize in a meaningful way. So for round 4, this is a summary of all the applications that we got from every district. If you notice on the first column, Richmond had 75 applications, the most out of any other district. So there was a lot of work on the backs of the VDOT district, validating these applications and getting the scopes in a readiness place for scoring. 19 applications were funded. This is the consensus scenario for round 4. So we have the staff recommended scenario that's in January and February. In between that time, the CTV has discretion to work with the applicants to change out projects. So this is a summary of the consensus scenario. I thought it would be really helpful here, and it'll add to our conversation later in the presentation, of knowing what the average Smart Scale scores for funded applications were, especially the one you're going to want to hone in on is the Richmond district. So 7.9 was the average Smart Scale score for a funded application. And this is going to be near or around a target that you would want to shoot for in the future while you're making applications or considering leveraging on a project. Another data point is average Smart Scale requests for funded projects. In the Richmond district, it was just shy of $10 million was the average Smart Scale request on the projects that were funded. And the average leverage amount of money for funded projects was $241,000 in the Richmond district, for about 2%. And this is going to be a key spot where you can see these funded applications go up in the future, is the leveraging of the money that is available right now. If that money is leveraged, you'll have access to a lot more, hopefully funded projects in the future. So here's that. One other thing I wanted to touch on before we go off of like the Smart Scale round 4 is in October, Nick Donahue made a presentation to the CTV about the Commonwealth Transportation Fund having a surplus for fiscal year 2021, which was unexpected. So that was a surplus, and it's a little over $300 million, $365 million, I think. And his suggestion was to allocate similarly along the lines of the way the district grant program percentages work out. So for the Richmond district, this would be about $42.7 million. And he had proposed funding some applications that were next in line on prioritization from the original Smart Scale staff recommended scenario. This is by no means set right now, or in a place
Brooke.
that it has to.
This is Liz. We sent this list to our CTV member who's going to be making the decision for the Richmond district, obviously. And he's still knocking some other potential options around. So this is by no means, I just want to let everybody on TAC know this is not. Yeah.
That's where I was getting.
Mr. Brown is still
by no means set. But you should be aware there is still time available to discuss and meet with CTV and the district for the opportunities with this extra money. So this is a good part for the Smart Scale program to have this money be used in the Smart Scale vein. So yes, work is still being done. Liz is leading that off, and this is subject to change. Some round 4 feedback that we got, we had 60 folks respond to our external survey for Smart Scale round 4. Every round we send out a portal blast to all of our applicants and users regarding how the round went, or if they have any feedback. Some of the feedback that we got was focusing on conditional screening, providing more actionable feedback, and keeping the results visible on the full application. We have already made steps to have that happen and make the full application carry those screening decisions over, so that's already in place. One other thing I want to note about conditional screening, so this round we're really going to focus on at pre-screening, having the applicant commit to the scope if possible for us to give a readiness decision. VTrans decisions aren't necessarily needing the scope to be nailed down, and even to some extent eligibility doesn't need the scope to be nailed down either. But for readiness, this relies on your scope being finalized and the applicants having all the components in the application match the scope. And at pre-screening, it hadn't in the past we hadn't been able to tell if all of the pieces are there. So on pre-application, there's 2 things. We're going to let folks fill out project features. We're going to have them add their attachments, if they're applicable attachments. And by the time they're done with a pre-app, they can say yes or no, I'm good with my scope. And if they need more time, that's fine. But we will not be providing that actionable readiness decision if those pieces aren't part of the application at that point. And again, it is still fine if your application is not finalized. We just cannot give a full readiness determination unless all of those pieces are there, because by definition, we're saying an application is ready if the scope is final and all the pieces match. So those eligibility and VTrans will be more set. The SEPs, the state's understanding of project scope, that's what that stands for. It was a new functionality that we added this year into the portal. It had some bugs since it was new, and there was a lot of offline coordination. And this round, we see it's going to be a lot smoother because all of the bugs have been worked out. And we're going to have some language outlining how, with a little bit more direction on how we want to outline these states' understanding of project scope. And we'll put out that feedback before we start the subs process. Same kind of issues have come up round over round about the organizational challenges that applicants are facing with their availability of staff or financial resources and needing more support from the district. Issues with screening and validation process. Again, this goes back to scope. As long as your scope is set and final for your application, a lot of it builds off of that. And I think that's one of our core issues, is making sure your scope is set. And before, I'm going to switch now to round 5 and our proposed changes. And a lot of these round 4 feedback actually builds into the round 5 proposed changes. So when we get requests in our surveys or in our emails, a lot of this starts off the process of what pieces we're going to dig into to improve the round 5 process in our measures and in our overall process improvements. So we got feedback on environmental quality measure this round, specifically asking if we can improve that or actually better quantify air quality. And that's a key piece I'm going to get into, is the quantifying process. And then for E2, this is your impact to natural and cultural resources measure. The one measure that is negative on the scorecard that you will see, feedback on whether or not it was appropriate to apply a quarter-mile buffer to all project types, specifically projects that could be considered done in the right-of-way that aren't creating a huge environmental impact outside of the right-of-way. So we dug into that. And on the land use measure, feedback that we work on is to revisit the land use measure, and through testing, we have looked into adding other area types for land use, and should other area types be considered for land use. Additionally, a lot of feedback centered around the cost estimates and requests to improve transparency and consistency. So E1 is what we're going to start with. I'm going to give you an overview of how it's currently calculated, because I'm not sure, to make sure we're all on the same page of how this is actually calculated. So on the application, the applicant is asked in the application if they have any of these components. It is broken up into 2 parts, a non-SOV component and then a freight component. The non-SOV component, the application runs you through all of these questions, and then you provide supporting documentation or information about each one of these factors. If you have, for instance, a park and ride or a rail or a bus, you're filling out your transit form that DRPT has put together, and DRPT validates that form, saying how many new users there are, or they help with the projection of new users. For bike and ped, either turning movement counts are provided or projections are made by TMPD on bike and peds. So we're collecting user data, and then we're also saying that you have those components. Every single one of these components relates to a point system. You're given these points that are shown here, 3 if you have a rail component, 2 for a bicycle component, and so on and so forth. And you can sum up these points with 8.5 points maximum. This equals more than 8.5, but 8.5 is your maximum. That value is multiplied by your peak period non-SOV users. Again, either projected or given the data, we are collecting that. So those 2 values are multiplied by each other to give you your non-SOV component. The freight component this is the first line here. It is a one piece that is not asked on the application. It is actually calculated from congestion scoring. Does it reduce traffic delay? Binary, yes or no. And if that is true, does it have greater than 8% of truck traffic for your daily AADT? So if those are true, then you get 1 point as an applicant. The second part of that is a question on the application. So if it includes improvements to freight or the rail network or intermodal facilities and ports, half a point can be awarded. These points are added up and multiplied by the peak period truck volumes. So these 2 things are added. Every project is compared and normalized on 0 to 100, and then this is worth 10% of your score across the state. This number does not change by different area types. And that is how we currently get this. One thing I'm going to point out is some of the issues that we saw where these two units aren't the same, so we're adding them together right now. So peak period non-SOV users and peak period truck volumes are not in the same unit, but we are currently kind of treating them like they are. And this is giving us a quasi-qualitative, quantitative method. So that's our first thing we want to improve on. And then the point system, we want to allocate them and correspond them to their users. And this is better shown in the example that I have right here. So again, this is an example, Lafayette Boulevard multimodal improvements. This was a true round 4 project. And this is how it's currently calculated. This project had a bike component on it, and it gave the information of 10 bicycle lockers and 10 covered bicycle spaces. In the current methodology, it takes the points 2 times the total number of increased users. So that was 59. They had a bike, ped, park and ride, and bus, and another component on there that all equaled 59 users. So you were taking the points times all total increased users. In our new method, we're suggesting taking the points, multiplying it by their correlated users that are direct to that user. And this helps with QC, and it also helps just create a more exact correlation to the points to the users so that you're not taking advantage of something that you're not currently creating an increased user from. So in the example of the bike, 2 times 0, the increased users was determined to be 0 for this particular project. And this kind of helps with QC that folks aren't just checking that they have a bike component when it doesn't necessarily create new users. We want to really focus on improvements that create new users. So taking this down, the pedestrian component of adding a sidewalk does create new users. It was determined that they were going to have 22 increased users. So you can take this 22 times 2 to get 44. And throughout the example, it's added according to the increased users and the point-based system. So you can tell that the sum from the current method was 442 to the sum to the new method is 105. We are proposing to remove the special accommodations EV category because we couldn't associate the points to the users in this case. So that won't be a part of the E1 now. Second thing is the freight section. We wanted to take that binary delay, yes or no, and put it on a scale to actually give credit for how much, or kind of make it a magnitude decision of how you are determining how much delay you're reducing for your truck freight section. So if you had between 0 and 2 person-hours of delay, you would get half a point. Between 2 and 100, you would get 1 point. And if it was greater than 100, you would get 2 points. So in this example, there were 13% trucks, and they had a peak period volume of 3,515 and 5.88 person-hours of delay reduced. And this does come directly from the C2 score. So you would have to have that. We will have that score before this could possibly be calculated. And that falls right in the 1 point range for this example. So it'd be the 1 times the 3,515 to give you the 3,515 score. Now, a key difference that we're implementing, because they are not in the same units, we are suggesting that these two should be normalized separately and then added together since they are in different units. So in this example, the score of 100.5 fell somewhere in the bottom percent. So it would get this 8.7 score, and this is compared to all 400 projects, or 397 in round 4. And then this freight score was the defining highest project number of all the cohorts, so it gets the 100 score. And the 100 and 8.7 are added together and divided by 2, weighted 50% each for a 54.4 score. So in the defining example, the way it's currently calculated, the score would have been nearly 4,000, and now it's 54.4. They're not going to be compared in any way in the similar way they were before. They shouldn't be compared directly, as they're not on the same magnitude. And just to kind of further prove that point, this example, the project doesn't change in rank overall. This is the impact to the E1 measure for the top scoring projects in round 4. This example, between the current and the proposed, the ranking did not change. In fact, we just had some minor movements. Intercity rail service was able to move up to the top spot from here, and we just had a little bit of moving up and down by 1 or 2 positions, and Mount Vernon Trail North enhancements was coming in. I do want to make a note that you can't just take the project title and assume what kind of project it is. Just because it says widening here doesn't mean there's not multimodal components on it. This particular I-64 widening project had a 90-space park and ride lot, and the turn lane project also had a park and ride lot with it. Every single one of these top scoring projects had a major multimodal component with it. And, you know, it would be really easy for someone to hone in and say, well, why is a widening project getting a good air quality score? And that's exactly why. And we balance that with E2, which actually looks at how much impact to the environment you're having. So you could get a high E1 score, and you could also get a high E2 score, which would be the negative, and they would balance each other out. So that was our first component. Our first thing we looked at was the qualitative. I'm going to switch to coming up with a quantitative E1 score.
Hey, Brooke.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just didn't want you to get too far along. I had a question about the example that you just went through where they were putting in bike lockers and bike racks or whatever, but they didn't get any, there was no increased user. So who makes that determination?
So 2 things. Either TMCs are provided from the applicant and validated by VDOT TMPD's department, and it's actually John Bolachek in TMPD, or the projections are made by John Bolachek in TMPD, and he has a methodology using population and looking at the volumes on the road and makes a determination. But in this particular case, you actually have to be adding either if it's a pedestrian, a sidewalk, or if it's a bike lane or a buffered bike lane to be getting increased users. That's part of his calculation, unless you can provide TMCs that show otherwise.
Yeah, and I was
That
gonna
makes sense.
add, Brooke, what we don't want to encourage is just putting like bike lockers everywhere as part of projects, and we're not actually investing in infrastructure and the facilities to support bicycling and walking. So an issue that came up where there were some bike lockers or bike racks put in a park and ride lot, if there were no bicycle and pedestrian facilities that serve that lot, that allow people in the surrounding communities to get to the lot, then that would be a case where we would say it's not going to increase the users, and we wouldn't count those as additional spaces. But if there is a bike facility serving the park and ride lot, and we're putting in bike lockers, then we would account those as additional spaces. And that's typically on a project by project basis, and something that the state bike ped coordinator will make a call on.
So in an application, you would have to really spell out that there's an existing facility going to the park and ride lot, and now we're putting in bike lockers. So that'll increase users.
Yes, ma'am. That would be very helpful. I do know we will look at the aerials and we'll look at the surrounding infrastructure, even if it's not called out in the application, to determine, are people going to be able to get to these bike lockers to use them or not? But certainly spelling that out in the application makes it a little bit easier if there is the infrastructure, or if the project includes the infrastructure that's going to get people to the bike lockers or bike parking.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Hey, Brooke, I also had a question on that one.
Yep.
Can you go back to the slide? Yes, so looking at the current and proposed, and I like the proposed change. What I don't understand though is why different points are given for the different modes. Since you're now looking at the actual increased users, I don't understand what difference it makes if those increased users are by bus versus park and ride. I can understand that in the current scenario where you'd have it maybe give a more weight, perhaps. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so this was introduced in round one, and it's a pseudo qualitative quantitative. So the idea with the point system was supposed to indicate magnitude, like a length of improvement. Rail projects are going to have a longer length. It's kind of to some extent arbitrary in some of the issue that we saw. And actually why I'm going to get into the next part of actually nailing down the important thing that we should be looking at is new users times the length of the project. Like how much magnitude of length is impacting on this project. It's not necessarily an arbitrary point that should be applied to it. But the original intent was to signify a magnitude on some level, that a rail improvement is going to be more than a bike ped and park and ride lot. So that was the original intent. I didn't make that system up.
Yeah, so am I hearing that you would be in favor of just eliminating the points and just looking at just measuring the increased users generated by the improvement?
We're not fully proposing that right now. As I get into the next, I guess hold tight and see where the next part is, because we are going to look at new users and length, but we aren't proposing of getting rid of this point system altogether right now. We're not, but it is something we could consider for the future and see how this CO2 offset value that I'm going to get into and show you improves, and see if we want to put more weight on that, because that takes your length and your new users into consideration. And it is something that I do like that captures that magnitude.
Thank you.
And I will also note this favors freight right now. So you can see that freight numbers are a lot bigger, and that's why we need to normalize these separately. But this methodology does favor freight over non-SOV. And we did want to put emphasis on non-SOV too. So looking at this next method for E2 or E1, excuse me. So we wanted to come up with a way to actually quantify air quality. We're not going to say this is something that it isn't. We're going to use data that we have or that we're collecting or calculating and come to a way to figure out how we could calculate possibly a number of CO2 and kilograms offset that we can get to, and actually look at those magnitude pieces I was discussing before. So we're already collecting the increase in non-SOV users. Like I said, getting it from the applicants or projecting it. We're already calculating the hours of delay reduced. We're currently doing that for our delay measure C2. We are already having the trip length used for our C1 and C2 measures. We're using GIS to map the analysis segments, so we get trip length in there. For bike and ped, that would be a little bit different. We're going to use national averages because we do not have that as part of our analysis for C2. And then apply emissions and fuel factors to that to get to a non-SOV CO2 offset and a reduced truck delay CO2 offset. And we'll be adding those together. So I'm going to go through how we are proposing to calculate that. So we want to get to an increased non-SOV VMT. So non-single occupancy vehicle miles traveled. For transit and park and ride users, like I said, we're going to multiply the new users that we collect from the applications by the analysis trip length that we use in our C measures. For pedestrians, we're going to multiply the total new users by 0.67 miles. That's a national average. And then bicyclists, we're going to multiply those new users by 3.54 miles, another national average. If you have these multiple components, we're going to still ask for those multiple components to be collected on the application, and we're going to track them separately. And all these new users multiplied by their trip lengths will be summed together to give us our total increased non-SOV VMT. Then from there, our increased non-SOV VMT will be multiplied by fuel efficiencies and emissions factors. And these are available publicly on EPA's website. There's nothing that we came up with out of the blue or out of on our own. We used publicly available factors that are accepted. So we're taking 1 gallon of gas, 24 miles times the 8.9 kilograms of CO2 per gallon. This creates kilograms of CO2 offset for the project. So we've got that for non-SOV. Second component then is also freight. So we're going to get a reduced truck delay. So right now we're currently calculating our person hours of delay for our congestion measures. And this is mode agnostic, and that's why it's person hours of delay. So you need to take this person hours of delay and get it back to persons per vehicle. So that's dividing by 1.2. And that's a factor that we use right now to currently convert in congestion. So this is what we're currently using. We're going to take that reduced truck delay and multiply it by the weighted average truck percent to get heavy vehicle hours of delay. And you can convert delay in the same way using fuel and emissions factors to kilograms of CO2 offset. So we're going to take this non-SOV CO2 offset and the freight CO2 offset and add them together. And they're going to be in the same measure, or they're going to be in the same units, kilograms of CO2, so they can just be added together. So here's that same example, just using this CO2 offset method. For bike and pet, it would have been those new increased users multiplied by that trip length to get you your VMT. The VMT is summed by segment in our computer based on where we analyze the C2 segments. And that's going to be multiplied by those users. So we'll have those numbers for each individual factor area to get to a non-SOV VMT of 338 in this example. That is multiplied by the fuel and emissions factors, get 125.5. For the freight, we add that 5.88 person hours of delay that needs to be divided by 1.2, and then we multiplied it by that 13% of trucks. And that was in the previous example before, to get 0.63 freight delay reduction hours. And we'll multiply that by the fuel and emissions factors. And you can see here now that the non-SOV method is favored over the freight method. And when you're bringing that magnitude into play, you can really get a view of what the true impacts are. So those two are added together to get a total score of 128, and that would be normalized versus all of the 397 projects. So what we're actually proposing is this, taking that first method I went over and that second method, the qualitative and the quantitative method, and just weighting them 50%, because we have something that's favoring the trucks and we have something that's favoring the non-SOV. And we'll do a blend between the two. There is a little bit more movement from here. And again, taking into consideration that length magnitude does make an impact. When we actually looked at this overall and what the funding scenario was, it didn't make a dramatic impact to the funding scenario, but really giving credit for non-SOV projects that have magnitude is the idea with this E1 measure, and getting to a place where we can quantify air quality a little bit better than what we were doing before. So that's E1 and what we're proposing for E1. For E2, again, this one is our negative measure. I'm going to give you an overview of what E2 is. So in E2, we have our example here, the proposed transportation project. Every single transportation project gets a quarter-mile buffer put around it. In this example, that quarter-mile buffer equals 1,000 acres. And then that quarter-mile buffer is overlaid with the sensitive layers or the natural and cultural resources layers. So cultural resources, wetlands, conservation, species, and habitat. And whatever touches this impact buffer, project buffer area is what becomes your acres impacted. In this example, we had 50 acres impacted of conservation, 0 of species and habitat, 100 of cultural resources, and 75 of wetlands to get a total of 225. The environmental division places a document scale on it. It is not actually saying anything about whether or not your environmental documents were completed or not. They will put it on a scale of the 0 to 50, and it could be a categorical exclusion at 10% or an EIS at 50%. You can also have 0 assigned. I think we had a handful, 15%. If you're doing a technology only improvement, you will not have this score placed on you. And they have a whole bunch of examples of how you could be a 0%. But they place a document scale on it. And in this case, it's 30%, the EA. And that would get you 68 total acres scaled by the environmental document. And this 68 is compared to every single other project, the other 397, and it is normalized on a 0 to -5 scale. So the question that we were getting here is, should this quarter-mile buffer be applied to every project? Quarter mile is a lot, and that's a half mile across here. And not every project is creating as much impact as different projects. So we discussed doing a tiered approach, which is kind of what we do in economic development as well, but tiered in the opposite way. The bigger, more impactful your project is, the bigger buffer you got to take. And here you get to get a benefit of a smaller project of looking at the right-of-way only in the tiered approach. And I'm going to show you that in this next slide. So looking at a tiered approach, the environmental division took a look at all of our state's understanding of project scopes and the project features and came up with a tiering assignment. And the first tier would be 30 feet, which is going to be signifying, quote unquote, like within the right of way. That's not necessarily going to be the case for every project. That 30 feet is the magic number of in the right of way. It's based loosely on how FHWA would approach buffers. So 30 feet would be tier 1, tier 2 is 1/8 of a mile, and tier 3 is 1/4 of a mile. So the old standard of 1/4 mile is now the new maximum in this approach. From there, all of these project features you can see have the assignment to them, and we're taking comments on that right now, especially things like highway other and rail transit other. We're going to look into those a little bit more to see if that's appropriate for their tiering, because typically folks use that project features to put in additional information, and that's not necessarily what they meant to select. So we're going to review some of this and look at the validity of this every round. But I do want to note, smart scale projects have many features. That's a signature thing of smart scale. So if you have access management and a new bridge, you're going to have to use the highest tier. So multi-components will need to consider that you will have the highest tier applied to it. From this study or this analysis that we did, we found that projects in tier 1 either improved in smart scale rank or remained at the same exact rank. So that's what we wanted to see, an improvement of your score if you were creating less impact and you were right sizing your project. And projects in tier 2 on average changed by less than 1 position in smart scale rank. So up or down 1 or 2 if you're in that middle. And that's exactly what we were hoping for. And projects in tier 3 fell on average of 4 positions in smart scale rank. And we had a couple outliers that dropped a bunch more. But when we looked at the funding scenario, only 2 projects were impacted by this overall decision. But this will actually reward projects that are right size or are within the right of way, and you will not be impacted as much as a bigger project. So we're hoping this improvement and tweak kind of addresses that concern of that negative score. And did somebody have a question before I moved on? Because I think I heard something.
Brooke, I've got a question. This is Chet.
Sure.
Just curious more than anything, but for say like a highway widening project where you're adding maybe 2 lanes on each side or 1 lane on each side versus adding a new transit line, are both of those buffered from the center line or is it from edge of pavement?
So this
Make
is
sense?
going to use, yeah, it's not exact what we're doing. We're taking the line work that is collected and used in the actual application. So we asked for the applicant, and last round, the districts did a lot of it too. They're just mapping along the LRS, and it's the center line to some extent. It's not perfect. And we're not making this something that it isn't. We're using the line work that is approved as a part of the application. And that's what's used for economic development too, or we will be using it for sure this time, not the project polygon. So that's where that comes from.
Okay, thanks.
All right, our last improvement that we're considering for round 5 is focusing on land use. And we're actually going to look at L1 and L2. What they have in common is non-work accessibility, or the number of key non-work destinations that are accessible within a reasonable walking distance is how it's defined. And right now that's currently set at 3 miles. The first thing we wanted to dig into whether or not that was considered reasonable. 3 miles is about an hour of walking. So from what we saw the national average on the previous slides I was showing you that we're using for E1, it's 0.67 miles. So we wanted to get something closer to that. So we looked at variable buffers or variable distances, and we looked at 1 mile and we looked at 3 mile again. And where we settled on is looking at a 1 mile buffer instead of a 3 because it is closer to that average trip, pedestrian trip length. On top of that, land use isn't only area type A and B issue. Walkability is a concern for a lot of communities, and walkability is important to businesses for a lot of communities. It's not just a urban, quote unquote, urban issue. It should be considered for area types C and D as well. And we tested 6 scenarios of all different combinations of buffers and area types impacted, but we also have to look at the weighting as well. Because if we're bringing in land use into C and D, we need to take points from other measure groups because it needs to add to 100 at the end. And so where we focused on taking from was accessibility and economic development in this, because we looked at directly where measures were underperforming on the whole of total benefit. And we saw that accessibility and economic development were not pulling their weight. But there's also another component to that. Accessibility is access to jobs and modes of transportation to jobs, and economic development is measuring your economic development. And land use is looking at walkability to business. And you could tie all 3 of these measures together pretty closely. And we think they're symbiotic and help each other. So where land use could get scores, we felt that it could fill in for 5% for each accessibility and economic development to get to that 10% for land use. In area type C, we just took from accessibility the 10%. We did pull into the mix area type B. It also had accessibility was underperforming by a lot. So we felt that it could use a boost from the land use as well and moving those weightings. So 5% came from accessibility and was given to land use in our test here. And so this is what we're currently considering. We're meeting with all of the districts and going through these proposed changes. We look at how it impacts scoring, what the smart scale scores come out as for round 4 data, and we're making those decisions on how to tweak the scores. But this is where we are right now. The last thing is that I wanted to touch on was cost estimates. as we were getting the feedback about cost estimates, there also happened to be at the same time, that was not related, a cost estimating division being set up in VDOT. And they have, throughout the year, they have published a cost estimating manual and associated implementation plan at the end of the summer this year. So they have put out guidance and guidelines on how to create estimates using the cost estimate workbook, which is the keystone part of creating this consistent summary and transparency. Every single program or estimate created needs to follow these guidelines. And beyond that, they will be having manual overview training, and it's going to be internally available first, but later they will have external training. And I did ask if it would be open to the public or the applicant community, and they will have this in-person, in-depth training available to the public. So that's it for our proposed changes. I'm going to get into the request that I got to look at leverage funding because y'all have had a lot of changes on available funding and might need to make decisions on how you want to leverage for the future. I really want to say that this is by no means looking into the crystal ball. I'm just looking at data from round 4 on these recommendations, and it doesn't necessarily mean that this will be a for sure predictor of round 5. That I feel like I could give you some insights on what we were seeing when we looked at the data. So what we actually found was kind of interesting, that we looked at applications with no leverage funds versus applications with leverage funds that were funded. And at the end here, you can kind of see that there actually wasn't a correlation to leveraging versus percent chance of being funded. The percent funded with no leveraging was actually higher than the percent funded with leveraging. The request amount is a much stronger predictor of your success than overall benefit or whether or not you leveraged at all. And really what it comes down to is most applicants don't leverage enough funds to bring that cost down, the request amount. And it's a more linear predictor of the application success than benefit score. So we broke down round 4, and this is all of the state. This is not just the Richmond region. So basically broke down the smart scale request amount, how many applications were requested for that category if it was less, and it's between. So this 9 is between 500,000 and $1 million, for example. So if it's somewhere between 500,000 and $1 million, you had a 56% chance of success in round 4. This is in all rounds. But using this table, you can kind of infer where the sweet spot is for your request amount. It's not necessarily how much you leverage, it's about how you can get your request amount down to what is a higher percent chance of getting funded. There's definitely a sweet spot between 7 million and 20 million. And then the last thing that I would add to that is focus on if it's a resubmit, and we'll kind of go through a couple examples here with this, but if it's a resubmit, you can look at what the benefit score was in the previous round. And if you're going to take it back to those first few slides of what the average smart scale score in Richmond for getting funding was about I think it was almost an 8, a 7.9. Looking at your benefit score and looking at how much money would need to be leveraged to get you to that 8, 9, 10 mark. And that's where you're solidly in the funding range for the smart scale score. So the 2 I wanted to highlight, this I-64 widening and eastbound, the westbound and eastbound widening project, I thought would be a good example because it has a really high benefit and they're regionally significant. So you're going to want to look at your projects that are regionally significant that you can leverage half the money or, you know, get the smart scale score into that 7 range. I think 30 or 25 million could be leveraged here and have a very good chance of being funded in round 5. Some other top projects that could have been funded in round 5 with a small amount of leveraging. Staples Mill road improvements, for example, I think would, with 2.1 million in leveraging on this particular project in round 4, could have been funded in round 4. So this one is an example where a small amount of leveraging would have done it well, and that's very unusual. Typically 2 or 3 million on a $25 million project isn't enough to get it over the hump, but this would be one example where it could have benefited from a small amount of leveraging. And you can see here, if you're able to take these scores and leverage small to medium amounts of money, $5 to $8 million, the smart scale score would benefit. And these particular projects for resubmit would have a good chance based on some leveraging and leveraging trends we were seeing.
Hey, Brooke?
Yep.
The 8 for Richmond, the smart scale score of 8 or better, does that apply to district grant primarily? That's, you know, I mean, if we get it to an 8 and it's 64, we're probably still not going to be able to get the high priority money for that project.
I think I can give you the high priority number, but it's not as high as you think it is. This would have had to be funded in high priority. Yes, there was $180 million given to the Richmond district this round. But 6842 and 6841 would need to come out of high priority. And I think it was like between an 8 and a 10 for high priority versus district grant. And obviously the numbers can be lower for district grant depending on what district you're in. In Nova, your district grant smart scale number needs to be much higher than the rest of the state.
Okay.
But I can follow up with that exact number for high priority, break it up for district grant and high priority. What the number that we quoted was an average between, it was just a review of what the average was for your district.
But they were still pretty close together.
It wasn't far off. I mean, we were just doing an algebra equation to figure out where we need to be for these numbers.
Thanks.
So I can break that 7.9 for a precise number for district grant and a precise number for HPP, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that might be good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. So the last new topic I want to cover is this new module in the Smart Portal. I think it was released in the LAP conference at the beginning of, or the end of October. This is currently open, and this is to be used for any program that uses the Smart Portal can use this pre-scoping module. And the whole idea around it is basically bringing in that district review earlier and the district validation earlier so that you could be almost application ready for any program, for Smart Scale, for HSIP, for revenue sharing, for TAP. Your pre-scoping module allows you to start working on your applications earlier before pre-application opens. And I know we've been getting requests throughout the years to do something like this, and it's finally here. And you can start working on these now. If you log into the Smart Portal and you do not see the pre-scoping module, you can reach out. You can reach out to IID, and I have the emails listed here. But some of the benefits of using the pre-scoping module right now before getting into the pre-application is you can put your cost estimate in and see how the inflation factors are going to be applied or where you're going to land for Smart Scale ahead of time. And that can help with coordination internally for applicants. And this also gives a heads up to the districts of what's coming down the line, and they can look at the risk and really participate in the application development earlier, because as soon as the Smart Portal opens, it is very crazy, very hectic, very busy, and it starts to become a blur. So this kind of gives that time and consideration to applications earlier. This is kind of a graphic just showing a process of how it can actually help you to get application ready projects earlier. So right now, project pipeline's going on, a lot of STARS projects are going on, and our other planning is happening right now. And you take these project concepts and put them directly into the pre-scoping module, and you can prioritize it based on feedback that you get from the districts and readiness feedback you get them to get to the point where you have application ready projects. And the intent of the pre-scoping module is it will be open all year round, that you can access that at any point and import the pre-scoping module into any program. And I put some resources here for that and who you would reach out to. If you log into Smart Portal and you have interest in doing this, you can email smartportal@ctv.virginia.gov and ask for access to the pre-scoping module. And just to tie this in, they are actually going to put out an email invitation via the district planners for public training for this actual module on December 2nd of 2021. So you shall be receiving an invitation soon to the training for the pre-scoping module, but by no means do you have to wait till the training happens. I think people are pretty comfortable with the portal right now or where it is, and you should be able to navigate around. And if you have questions, you can reach out to those same folks for questions regarding the pre-scoping module. For Smart Scale specifically, we do want to put out a live webinar presenting the proposed round 5 changes. It's probably going to be pretty similar to what I showed you. And an email blast will be sent to the portal users, and it'll be live for questions and recorded and posted on our Smart Scale website. In December, we're hoping for the CTV to adopt round 5 changes so that we can get the technical guide released by the end of the year. And this was actually a source of feedback that we got, is that the earlier we can get out the technical guide, the better for folks. And that is not lost on us or lost on our radar. So we do want to get the technical guide out as early as possible this year. And then March 2022, the pre-application will be open. That's what we have coming down the pike. And my email is here if you need to ask me any questions, and I'll be available for questions or comments. If you have specific things about the round 5 proposed recommendations, please reach out to me. I'm happy to take in comments and take them up higher if needed. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brooke. That was very informative. Thanks for putting all the contact information out there too. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions as we get into round 5.
Yeah, thank
okay.
you, Brooke.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to item 7, transportation agency updates. Tiffany, you're up first.
Thank you. I think my camera is not working this morning, of course. For my agency update this month, I have a few items I wanted to provide. First off, as always, with our transit equity and modernization study. Again, thank you for bearing with me as I traveled in mid-transit, no pun intended, to give the presentation. But just to give an update on where we are from the, last month, we are wrapping up once again the baseline conditions and needs assessment technical memo. We are also scheduled having our second round of technical working group meetings this week and next week. We are working through finalizing our interim study report, which will be available in December. That's our first deliverable required from this study. And then hopefully in the next coming months, once we get the approval on the interim report, we'll be able to update our actual study website, which is vatransitequity.com, with some more content. And so that'll include story maps, writer testimonials, and initial findings. The second item I want to do for my agency update is related to TRIP. I think I mentioned this before about the presentation at the October CTV meeting on the draft recommendations for the first round of funding. I'm not sure if I mentioned what was part of the draft recommendations last month, but just in case, we are recommending 3 regional routes, the regional connectivity pot of funds. That will be for Greater Lynchburg Transit Company, Petersburg Area Transit, and Hampton Roads Transit. And now the Zero Fare projects, we had 4 applications that were recommended. GRTC, Alexandria Dash, and then Mountain Empire Older Citizens all were recommended for the system-wide Zero Fare application. And then Fairfax County got approval or recommendation for their low-income house program. Due to the kind of oversubscription of applications for Zero Fare, we are going to work forward with 2 additional Zero Fare projects. They were from Charlottesville Area Transit and in Fredericksburg for system-wide Zero Fare. All that said, we are likely going to reopen because of the lower amount of regional connectivity project applications. We will entertain a mid-year cycle application for that pot of funds. So we'll be presenting a little bit more information about that at our grantee workshops, which I'll mention in just 1 minute. Wanted to make sure we highlighted that we did release our Transportation Navigator. This was one of the projects that we had through one of the FTA discretionary grants. This was the Mobility for All grant program. We also were able to secure some funding through the CTV's Innovation and Technology Transportation Fund, or ITTF. So this is just kind of building a little bit on some of the Virginia Navigator platform. We provided now an online archive of public transportation information in Virginia. So this now has a directory of all public transit, human service, and specialized transportation providers, programs, and services. We also have included with this access to transit route, schedule, and stop information through GTFS, or General Transit Feed Specification, for all of our transit agencies in the state. So I think that's roughly 39, not counting WMATA. So any kind of information you would like to utilize, this is probably a really good resource to access. We did also develop a Virginia Transportation Finder widget that is now on our ZRPC website. And that can also be made available so that you can post it on your agency webpage if you're so interested. Last is we have a lot of upcoming transit webinars. I think that the first one that's coming up is on the 19th. And I'm glad to send this email out for, we did a separate email blast related to these transit webinars. So I'd be glad to forward that through to Chet and his team to distribute. But November 19th, we have our Tier 2 TAM kickoff. We're doing our next update in 2022. This is not as relevant for the Richmond TPO because GRTC does their own as a Tier 1 plan. But if you're interested in kind of the details for our state group plan, you're welcome to sit in and attend on this. November 22nd, we are also hosting a COVID-19 strategies handbook. We did also get another FTA discretionary grant for COVID-19 resources. And so we developed what we're calling our Virginia Transit Crisis Response and Recovery Handbook, which provides some support and resources for a lot of our transit agencies on how to respond to the pandemic and how to transition to provide some marketing materials and resources for their ridership to make them feel more comfortable coming back to public transportation. We do have a DRPT COVID-19 webpage that is linked in my agency update as well. The last 2 workshops I have, these are all related to our FY23 grant cycle, which will be opening up in December. On November 29th, we'll be having our community assistance programs grant workshop. That'll be from 1 to 3. And then November 30th will be our transit special programs and MPO grant workshop. So that'll also be from 1 to 3. And that's all I have for my update today. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tiffany. Any questions for Tiffany? Okay, I don't see Patricia Robinson on. Is anyone there from GRTC? Okay,
I don't believe there is.
Skip that one. Yeah, I don't think so either. Okay, we'll skip that for today and move on to Mr. O'Keefe for Ride Finders.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did want to let everybody know that we did continue to promote the 40 Days of Good for 40 Years of Service. It's an initiative to encourage the citizens to help celebrate the 40th anniversary of Ride Finders by doing some of the following: something good in their community, something good in the environment for their neighbor, and for doing good deeds and posting those on social media using the hashtag 40 for 40 ride finders. So if any of y'all do anything and can use that hashtag, we would greatly appreciate that. Ride finders participated in outreach events at the Southside Relief Organization distribution of trees through the communities, and they've identified as a urban heat desert. So Brigitte here at Ride Finders participated in that. And I also participated in walk to school events at Cool Springs Elementary in Hanover County, as well as Salem Church Elementary in Chesterfield County. We completed and submitted grant applications for CMAQ through the RRTPO, as well as for the counties of Henrico, Hanover, Chesterfield, Goochland, and the city of Hopewell. And we also updated the progress report for our Carpool Initiative program as required by the RRTPO. We provided DRPT with data from the FY28 through FY20 Emergency Ride Home program for the number of trips taken, the dollars spent, and the longest distances of the trips taken during those time periods. We did have another van pool start, a 7-passenger from the Richmond area going to DLA Fort Belvoir. So as I've continued to mention, I know over the last couple of months, we are starting to see van pools increase a little bit, but not in the great masses. And last but not least, I'm proud to report for the third month in a row, we did win the best grassroots marketing campaign for the Chesapeake chapter for the Association of Commuter Transportation for our It's a Green Thing campaign. So it is, I promise you all, they're all different awards. I'm not repeating the same ones, but we're very proud of that. And that, Madam Chair, that's the end of my report.
All right, thank you, John. That's awesome news. And last but not least, I believe Nicole's going to give the update for VDOT.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I'm sharing my screen. Please let me know if you cannot see that right now. I'll start with a quick CTV recap on the workshop day in October. You can use this link to go directly to the workshop agenda and the presentations, where you can learn more about transforming rail in Virginia, the agreement between VDOT, DRPT, and VPRA, VTrans Long-Term Risk Opportunity Register, information on the 2021 transportation initiatives, capital project revenue and refunding bonds. Deputy Secretary Donahue gave a presentation on transportation revenues and opportunities. There was a recommendation to use $295 million from the FY21 CTF surplus to fund priority projects from Smart Scale Round 4. The CTB may allocate these funds at their December meeting. Brooke gave a presentation on the proposed changes for Smart Scale Round 5, and there was a presentation on the Virginia Transportation Infrastructure Bank. At their action meeting, and again, you can use this link to go directly to the agenda and the details of the resolutions, the board approved the special structure 50-year long-term plan. They took action on the FY22 through 27 SYIP transfers, which included the sidewalk project on McRae Road in Chesterfield County and the Brook Road and Hilliard Road Trail in Henrico County. And they also approved the 2021 Transportation Initiative Interim Report. There are no November CTB meetings. Looking ahead, the workshop meeting and the action meeting were originally scheduled to be on the same day, so this is a change on the calendar. The workshop meeting is now on December the 7th at 10 a.m. and the action meeting will take place on December the 8th at 9 a.m. Moving on to Smart Scale. We all know Round 5 will begin in 2022. Concept and application development assistance is available now. The district is your main first point of contact for applications, so please reach out to Jake for assistance. The sooner the better. Pre-application is anticipated to open in March, and Brooke mentioned the webinar That will be a live webinar for questions. It will be recorded and will be posted on the Smart Scale website. And you should receive a notification on your portal for date and time of this webinar. Moving on to Fall Line news, the Central Virginia Transportation Authority took action to submit a letter to the governor committing $108 million for the Fall Line trail system. This includes a request for the state to provide the difference to fund the trail effort. With the $70 million already committed, these additional funds would fully fund Fall Line. And last but not least, there is a public hearing scheduled regarding multiple routes through truck restrictions in Hanover County on December the 2nd, and the ad for the public hearing is attached to my update. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nicole. Any questions for Nicole or Liz?
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is Chet. I just wanted to clarify that the Fall Line action that the CBTA took was to submit an update to the governor with the final action that's going to come at their December meeting. So the request may change, but that was an update to get them ready for the full ask in December.
Okay, thank you, Chet. Okay, moving on. Future meeting topics are listed on page 9. And if there's anything else you'd like to add, get in touch with Chet or Janice. I'm sorry. Any TAC member comments? Okay, and then our next meeting is scheduled for December 14th. I assume at the same time and hopefully the same virtual channel. And I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. And if there's nothing else, we can adjourn. Thank you.
Thanks. One other item, I think logistics wise, before people hang up, as of right now, TAC is continuing to be virtual through December, but we'll have to wait and see if there are any changes to meeting requirements or allowances. But at this time, we're gearing up to be able to meet in person in January, like we used to do. So stay in touch, and we'll provide everybody updates as soon as we know more information.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. You
Bye.
too.
Thanks.